I know you see it, girl. This ain't sitting real good in my soul. Everywhere this little girl goes, she pick up another obstacle. She was my heart. I don't know the tribe or the fall, but by default, she don't think of me. I thought she was an Indian. She be slanging things like a simian.
Creditor. So now, since this law give to these banks to bail. So if you don't know what a bail-in is, if you guys remember back in 2008 where the banks were bailed out, they were bailed out with taxpayer money, meaning that nobody came to your bank account and took money out of your bank account to give to these banks to bail them out, to make them whole, right? They were bailed out with taxpayer money, all right? So everybody footed the bill for that. A bail-in is the opposite. A bail-in is if a bank fails, the bank is going to use whatever equity it has to bail itself out from within. So let's say, for example, I was a bank and I had, let's just say I had 10 people who deposited money in my bank, right? They think it's their money. But this here law makes it to where if you deposit money in a bank, all right, you are no longer a depositor. You're considered a creditor. So now, since this law was passed, if a bank fails, there will not be a bailout for that bank, meaning that the government isn't going to take taxpayer funds to bail that bank out. That bank is going to bail in whatever accounts it has in order for it to make itself whole. And since we as depositors are now considered creditors, guess who is in line before all of us? The stockholders are, all right, of those banks. They get their money first. Guess who gets their money last? Whatever's left of it, the creditors are. Okay? So that's why this law is a big deal. And I think it has something to do with this HR 5404 that's just sitting there in Congress. Okay? So, like I said, they passed this law here back a few years back, and I'm going to read it to you really quick so that you can get an idea of exactly what it is. All right? So it says here, if you ask any number of Americans to tell you if they believe their bank accounts are protected, a modicum of the group will reply that the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, as everyone knows it, backstops their money and accounts up to $250,000. So in other words, everyone is under the I'm going to call it a spell, because it's exactly what it is, because it's not real. Everyone thinks that they are insured up to $250,000 in their accounts if they have whatever they have in the bank. All right. However, if you push the envelope a little further and ask them if the FDIC has any other function, they will stare blankly at you and perhaps mumble that they are simply another government agency with one specific purpose. Right? It used to be that the FDIC was just the insurer of bank accounts up to $100,000, and then in 2008 they changed it to $250,000 so that people wouldn't pull their money out of the banks. All right, but now after this law is passed, the FDIC has one other function besides being an insurer. This, however, is no longer true, saying that the FDIC only has one function. And in fact, the FDIC has taken a much larger role. Back in 2012, the FDIC met with the Bank of England in a joint conference to hash out the framework for bail-in procedures should not only banks go insolvent, but also should there be a sovereign debt default in the wake of a financial collapse. And perhaps more importantly for the common man and individual, the FDIC now has the power to write down your account without ever having to compensate you through promised insurance, as they were required by law prior to this conference. and the passage of Dodd-Frank. So pretty much what they're saying is that your money is no longer really insured. If there is a systemic bank failure, your money is going to be used as a way to bail out the banks. But it's going to be with the depositors' money, not with public funds, i.e. where everyone is paying through the taxes that we pay, just like they bailed out the banks in 2008. It's not going to be like that anymore. With this law, it says that the depositors, that the people that actually have money in the bank are the ones that are going to lose that money, all right, or lose a portion of that money in order for the banks to be made whole. If you guys go ahead and research a little bit about Cyprus, I think it was back in the early 2000s, maybe, the people in Cyprus had a bail-in, and the average person with money in the bank there lost, I think it was like 46% of their deposits. All right, so let's carry on. Title II of the Dodd-Frank Act provides the FDIC with new powers to resolve systemically important financial institutions by establishing the Orderly Liquidation Authority under the, okay, so that's their new role, all right? Under the OLA, the FDIC may be appointed receiver for any U.S. financial company that meets specified criteria, including being in default or in danger of default, and whose resolution under the U.S. Bankruptcy Code or other relevant insolvency process would likely create systemic instability. So what this is saying here is that the FDIC will now be able to be appointed, I would say in layman terms, as like the caretaker of a bank that is failing or has failed. And if that bank is going to fail and cause a domino effect where a lot of other banks are going to fail, they can take over that bank, okay? So it says here in the U.S., Title II requires that the losses of any financial company placed into receivership will not be borne by taxpayers, all right? This is the important part, all right? But by common and preferred stockholders, debt holders, and other unsecured creditors, all right? And you know who the unsecured creditors are? It's going to be whoever has money in that bank. And that management responsibility for the condition of the financial company will be replaced. All right, I'm not going to go over what the UK is, all right? But here it says, this is Zero Hedge kind of simplifies it for us, all right? So it says here, so if a large bank fails in the US, the FDIC steps in and takes over, replacing management and works to shrink the bank by writing down liabilities and converting debt into equity, right? In other words, any liability at the bank is in danger of being written down should the banks fail, right? And guess what? Depositors are considered liabilities, right? You being a depositor, you having money in the bank, you are considered a liability to that bank because that bank has to make sure that you can get your money back, all right? So that a deposit into the bank that you make is actually a liability for that bank, all right? So depositors are considered liabilities according to U.S. banking law, and depositors are creditors. All right. So when I saw this bill, HR 5404, I was thinking they passed this Dodd-Frank Act back in, when was it? 2010, 2012. Okay. And why did they do that? You know, ask yourself, why did they do that? In 2012, we're supposed to be, you know, doing better in the economy. After 2008, we're supposed to be growing and all that stuff, right? So why did they pass this bill, right? And not many people talk about this in the mainstream media. It's not really known by a lot of people that you are no longer considered a depositor. You are now considered a creditor and a liability to the bank, all right? And not very many people know that the FDIC can now pretty much take over a bank, all right, if the bank is failing or fails, right? And then they can bail in that bank with the money from its depositors, all right? So what I'm thinking is nothing in government or in politics happens by chance, right? Everything is planned out, right? And this is just my opinion. And they've had this law on the books now for several years, for more than 5 years, 5, 6, 7 years, right? And now we have a bill, all right, that's just been sitting on the House floor for the last year, just sitting there collecting dust, all right, about turning the dollar back into a gold-backed currency. All right, so to me, it's just kind of, I don't know, you know, I'm really thinking out loud here, but to me, it kind of makes sense that they are starting to stack these bills and these laws on top of each other and spread out far enough to where not too many people are asking questions. All right, so I'm sure they know something we don't. Okay, but listen to this bill. This bill is great. This bill sounds great. But like I said, it has no co-sponsors, all right? And there's only one person who sponsored this bill, but it has no co-sponsors. And it's been sitting, at the House of Representatives for the last year just collecting dust. And you know how sometimes they'll have a bill just sitting there and then all of a sudden something happens. And then the next day they're like, oh yeah, we have this bill that we can pass that will take care of this problem. Well, how can they have that bill ready if, that fast? Well, I think this is an example of this right here. I think that they're holding this bill right here. I think that they passed this bill, the one about the Dodd-Frank, knowing that in the future there are going to be more bank failures, and knowing that it's not very politically I guess it's not very politically sustainable for these politicians. It's not really politically good for them to say, oh yeah, we're going to have another bailout, because the American people, they're not going to go for another bailout. So now what they're going to do is they're going to do the opposite. They're going to do a bail-in. They're actually going to take money from people that actually have money instead of taking it from everyone. All right. So this HR 5404, all right, it starts by, to define the dollar as a fixed weight of gold, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled. Findings. And ladies and gentlemen, when you hear me say what these findings are, you're like, why in the world haven't we passed this bill yet? And the thing is I don't understand why we have to pass this bill, because it's already pretty much in the Constitution that says what real money really is and what money we're supposed to be using. Right? So here, findings. The United States dollar has lost 30% of its purchasing power since 2000 and 96% of its purchasing power since the end of the gold standard in 1913. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these people know this. They already know this, but they continue to print. And they continue to do monetary policy that they've been doing, even though they know that the dollar has lost 96% of its purchasing power since it became the dollar in 1913, since they got off the pure gold standard. Number 2, under the Federal Reserve's 2% inflation objective, the dollar loses half of its purchasing power every generation or 35 years. American families need long-term price stability to meet their household spending needs, save money, and plan for retirement. The Federal Reserve policy of long-term inflation has made American manufacturing uncompetitive, raising the cost of the United States manufacturing goods by more than 40% since 2000, compared to less than 20% in Germany and France. Between 2000 and 2010, United States manufacturing employment shrunk by 1/3 after holding steady for 30 years at nearly 20 million jobs. The American economy needs a stable dollar, fixed exchange rates, and money supply controlled by the market, not the government. The gold standard puts control of the money supply with the market instead of the Federal Reserve. So pretty much number 7 here pretty much tells me that if they pass this bill, the Federal Reserve will be a thing of the past. The gold standard means legal tender defined by and convertible into a certain quantity of gold. Under the gold standard through 1913, the United States economy grew at an annual average of 4%, 1/3 larger than the growth rate since then and twice the level of 2000. The International Gold Exchange Standard from 1914 to 1970